Hi, my name is Matthew Heffernan. Thank you for watching this presentation. I'll be going through a few elements that went into my prototype. I'll first begin by describing the motivation for this prototype and why this particular CPS was chosen instead of another. Following this, I'll go through the design phase of the prototype and some of the tools that we used and why, and how these inform the next phase of the project. The next phase was the coding and development of the prototype, and similarly I'll go through what tools were used and why. Finally, the presentation will go through what the prototype ended up looking like and what some of the challenges were. To conclude, I will go through what I envisage will be the next steps to take the prototype into alpha testing and perhaps even into production. The primary motivator for this prototype is the obscene number of Indigenous deaths in custody, and in fact, during the start of the semester, there were already approximately 4 by the time work began on this prototype. In the early ideation phases of this assignment, I was considering building a feral cat identifier that would use machine learning to then proceed to trap them. However, I thought there might be some issues around harm to animals, and I realized also that this was not an area of passion for me, something that would end up coming back to bite me. Once I had moved past the ideation phase and landed on a vague idea of what I wanted to build, I wanted to have a bit of a project plan so that I could manage assets, sprints, and plan for what the next phases of the assignment would be. For this process, I used Trello. Here I was able to split the project into more discrete sprints, and within each card I was able to add assets, research, links, and comments for myself. As I moved through each phase, I would use the green label to indicate that the phase was completed. I used the red label, which indicates that that particular sprint was on hold, and the orange label indicated that that was a sprint that I was currently working on. For the wireframing and visual UX design, I used Adobe XD, a tool for prototyping UIs for the web and mobile applications. For the visual design, I chose Bootstrap 5, a web design template library UI kit. This enabled me to map out the flow of the app, as well as plan for the interactions I wanted to Wizard of Oz with the actual application, without having to create complex design bibles and so on for the different components. Adobe even has a new feature within XD, which allowed me to test the transition between pages based on voice commands.
Contact family.
Once this was completed, I was now ready to start moving to a development and coding environment. In the coding and development phase, the tools I used were Visual Studio Code, as it's an integrated development environment I'm comfortable with, along with Node.js and Node packages, as these provide complex features in an abstracted format that is easy to integrate into JavaScript. I used a JavaScript framework called React, which helps modularize the application into discrete components that handle the respective functions of the application individually. For the styling and the arrangement of the visual and the logic, I used CSS and HTML respectively. I went with Node, JavaScript, React, HTML, and CSS because I didn't want to spend too much time designing a graphic user interface in Python. I did, however, consider using a Python framework such as Django, but figured that moving between contexts too much would be too taxing on my time. JavaScript enabled me to stay within a Node and web environment, and React ensured that the context switching only minimally disrupted the overall workflow. I also used an Android wrapper tool called Cordova, which enables developers to take progressive web applications and package them as Android applications, as well as access the sensors and actuators on the device itself. The project is almost complete as an Android package, however, I could not quite get the microphone working for the Android application. What I would do differently in this phase, however, is consider the open source voice machine learning alternatives to Google. I spent weeks trying to decipher how to practically implement Google into my app, and only towards the last few weeks did I decide I needed to reject it. However, this turned into a positive, as the voice recognition Node package I did end up using was quite robust and had built-in support for machine learning and training models for various different voice commands. The prototype now is still operating as a progressive web app. The voice command works, however, isn't connected to any kind of push notifications or email systems. Currently, the data capture is limited to session storage, meaning all information input is cleared once the user exits the tab or closes the app on their phone. There is also no actual authentication system on the prototype. The landing page is simply a Wizard of Oz to test the UX. In terms of the new branch of engineering, I believe my prototype has captured all the key indicators quite well. It is a technology that seeks to disrupt current power structures and redistribute them back to traditional Indigenous family models. The prototype was designed with sustainability in mind, i.e., don't reinvent the wheel. I didn't want the end users to have to learn how to interact with a whole new system and or purchase any additional electronics, when I could just as easily leverage the cyber-physical system they carry with them every day. Lastly, the app is all about safety. It was created in such a way that any future real-world deployments will be done with in-depth consulting, testing, and most importantly, community approval. Through this process, I learned some new skills, including understanding some of Google's online deployment services, as well as their voice assistant API, even though I wasn't quite able to implement it in the end. I also learned how to use a new client-side router for the application. This is what enabled the app to run very quickly and not take up too much memory or processor headroom when loading the different pages. In terms of what I'd do differently, I would definitely consider spending a bit more time exploring the alternatives to the Google Voice. I also think I should have built the UI to look more like an Android app. I think perhaps I got stuck on trying to get the functionality right, that I forgot about the look and feel, which can be just as important sometimes. Another massive challenge for me was understanding the emotional toll this project would take on me. I thought I could just approach this as a technology project and remove myself emotionally from it. Hence, I struggled with the work sometimes and was quite overcritical of myself if I couldn't achieve the things I wanted to. This led to some anxiety and some feelings of dread when I found myself unable to work on the project some days. I think for any future work, I need to have mechanisms in place to check how I'm feeling and talk these through with friends and family. I do envisage continuing development on the prototype. The next steps will involve building out the UI so that it looks and feels like a native Android and or iOS application. I also want to leverage the phone actuators to send feedback to the user to let them know that their message or their voice command was successful. I will also need to figure out how to access the device sensors so as to capture the user commands to activate this message. From there will be a small alpha test with a small group of testers. There'll be stress testing, ensuring that security features, the UX, and etc. won't break when used in edge cases and or even normal light use cases. On a social level, I'll be contacting NGOs and Indigenous legal service to discuss whether this prototype is even feasible and whether it can be incorporated into current workflows to complement work that is already being done in this niche. Thank you so much for your time.